Coming up, it's back to school. Find out what to expect this school year. And an athletic director in Oklahoma makes history. And Johns Hopkins invests in Indigenous health and policy. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amarawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. We start in Alaska, where a Yupik person has done something never achieved before. On Wednesday, Mary Peltola was elected as Alaska's only member of the U.S. House of Representatives. This makes her the first Alaska Native to ever be elected to the U.S. Congress. Peltola, who is a Democrat, won with 51% of the vote in an upset over former Governor Sarah Palin. The seat in Congress became vacant after former Congressman Don Young died in March. Peltola was first elected to political office when she was 24 as a member of the Alaska State House. She served in that position for a decade. Since then, she worked in different positions in community development as part of the Kuskokwim River Intertribal Fish Commission. This is the first time Alaskans used a ranked choice voting system. With ballots being cast on August 16th, they weren't released until Wednesday, which happened to be Peltola's 49th birthday. Up next, Peltola will serve the remainder of Young's term in the U.S. House. She will be on the ballot again in November to decide if she will be elected for a new term. In Canada, an Indigenous member of Parliament is speaking out about a disturbing trend of harassment against those in media. APTN's Fraser Needham has the latest.
Global news journalist Rachel Gilmore sent out this tweet earlier this week. Last night, someone who clearly owns guns directly threatened and harassed my entire family. I'm speaking to police chief about this, but it's already forcing my loved ones to take precautions. You can disagree with my reporting, you can critique it, but don't threaten my family. An NDP MP, Leah Gazan, says she has also noticed an increasing and disturbing trend.
One of the pillars of a functioning democracy is to ensure freedom of the press. And that means allowing journalists to do what they need to do as part of a functioning democracy. You know, the recent harassment of women, particularly female journalists, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, has been abhorrent.
In a recent letter to the police chiefs of Ottawa and Toronto and posted online, the Canadian Association of Journalists makes a number of observations. For the most part, these reports have been filed by racialized journalists or writers who are experiencing an increasing number of targeted, vile threats of violence. The volume and nature of the rhetoric has caused many of these journalists to fear for their safety. Many of the threatening emails use similar language, the same language commonly used by domestic extremist groups. And we ask that you review and improve your respective processes for making complaints of hate speech and harassment. It should go without saying that victims should not be made to wait hours on the phone to file complaints. Gazan says she agrees that attacks against journalists are largely coming from those affiliated with the extreme far right.
We have a growing alt-right movement. We've had leaders, I would say Trump, that have, made people feel emboldened to come out and with the most, as we are seeing with the journalists, with the most violent, aggressive attacks.
Journalists complained of being harassed this past winter by members of the Freedom Convoy who occupied downtown Ottawa streets for more than a month. And more recently, there have been complaints against another convoy-affiliated group, the United People of Canada, who are currently fighting eviction from a former church in Ottawa. And Gazan says it is not only police that need to step up to address the problem, but also the federal government.
the Prime Minister needs to meet with the Canadian Association of Journalists. He needs to heed their calls for safety and not tweet, but he needs to act immediately.
Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Well, Friday marks the birthday of an Indigenous matriarch who fiercely protected her people long ago. Before Hawaii became a state, it was an independent nation. Multiple kings led the Kingdom of Hawaii, and then in 1877, Queen Liliuokalani became the first woman to rule. She was sadly the last monarch of the kingdom. Tragically, in 1896, American businessmen and settlers overthrew the Hawaiian kingdom by staging an insurrection. To avoid bloodshed, Liliuokalani surrendered herself. She was locked in her palace and was jailed on several occasions following. For years, she tried to reinstate herself as the rightful ruler. Despite all that she endured, she shared the love of her people. Later in life, Liliuokalani founded schools for Native Hawaiian children and composed music. To this day, many Native Hawaiians celebrate her and her legacy. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, Bacone College welcomes Tara Cooney Baker as its new athletic director. Dr. Don Warren heads to Johns Hopkins, and corn is sacred to the Hopi. But first, it's back to school time. What can students and educators expect? There is excitement in the air as summer comes to an end and school starts again. Earlier this month, I talked to my sister who is a teacher. She told me about what students and educators can expect this school year.
Hey everybody, Lori Chavez here from Kiwa Pueblo. Here at Santo Domingo School, I teach middle school history, and I also run the Indigenous Education Initiative grant, which is bringing Indigenous experiences to our school.
Students are heading back to school everywhere. When you're seeing students in the hallway or in the lunchroom, what are they telling you about how they're feeling to be back at school?
Funny enough, we did do an activity where we shared a SEL activity, and everyone had to share a little bit of feelings of their first day. I heard things from excited, nervous, lost. I a girl who came back from virtual learning last year and who is now here back in person, is feeling a little lost on the first day. So it's kind of cool. We have students coming back from last year who came back in person, and some students who are coming back from virtual learning. So it's really finding where they're meeting in the middle.
A lot of our viewers are hearing about this school for the first time, and you mainly teach Indigenous students. Maybe tell us about the makeup of your classroom and how you empower your Indigenous students to be proud of themselves and where they come from.
So the biggest thing at Santo Domingo School is we are a 99% Indigenous school within a public school. This is very unique because you don't normally find 100% Indigenous schools within public school districts. We also are on Native land. Our school building is housed on the Kiwa Pueblo. So that's another amazing partnership that a non-Native public school district makes a partnership with our Indigenous community. How I empower my students is when they come into their classroom, the biggest thing I can do is be a face from their community. I speak their language. I greet them in our Indigenous greetings. As they come into our classroom, in my history classroom, the biggest thing I want to do is indigenize their learning. So how am I giving opportunities for them to see themselves in stories, in media, in history books, and things of that nature?
Actually, talk more about that because history is something that we talk about so often on our newscast and how it's taught and what kinds of topics are taught. What do you teach and what do you ultimately hope that your students take away?
So this year I'm teaching middle school history. We do teach world history, US history, and New Mexico history. In all those aspects, as we all know, the Indigenous narrative isn't on the forefront of our textbooks or even our history media that we're learning. So, as an Indigenous teacher, it's my duty and my actually excitement to bring different experiences, different stories of different tribes, different historians, women historians, Indigenous history makers, and people who weren't normally sought out to tell the history of America. We also know like the Indigenous narrative isn't always included. So really having an opportunity to share stories from different tribes, not only in America, but across the world.
And is that something that you're finding that your students want to learn about?
Yeah, it's interesting enough. Our state is actually moving toward indigenizing education through a lawsuit called Yazzie versus Martinez. But prior to that, at our school in Santo Domingo, our kids have been craving and needing indigenous experiences from since I remember. I walked through this hallways as a young girl, and I always wanted to see a native principal at my school. And so we're on our way. We have a couple, actually more than five native teachers here on campus. We're starting to see the change of indigenous education in New Mexico, not only seeing faces who look like them, but histories and stories included in the curriculum that they're learning.
One of the parts that I really want our viewers to learn more about is what you allow your students to call you. So I understand they actually have the option of calling you a few different things. Maybe tell us what that is and why you do that and why you do that intentionally.
So in my school, I give the kids or my students the option to call me three things. They can call me Miss Chavez, of course. The second name they can call me is Kuwayat, which is my indigenous name. And then my third name, I go by Auntie Lori in the school. And the reason why I call myself Auntie Lori, or the students call me Auntie Lori, is we're practicing kinship. We're practicing this idea that even though I am a teacher in the school, an elder of theirs, I am still of that age of being an auntie. So, regardless of whether I'm non native or native, I can feel that auntie role for them in the school. So, it's really cool. I walk down the hallway in kindergarten, even though I'm a middle school teacher, and I hear Auntie Lori, and I turn around, and it's a student who's not even related to me, but they still honor that kinship. So, it's really cool and awesome to kind of create that experience in my school.
Absolutely. Well, we only have a short time left here, but I want to actually talk about the other Indigenous educators who watch this newscast and are maybe listening to this interview. I understand that, back to school time comes with a mix of emotions, and especially going through a pandemic, not everyone is as excited as they would be before the pandemic. So maybe if you were talking to Indigenous educator who needed some advice or a pick me up, what would you say to them?
I would tell to my indigenous educators across Indian country, it's really important to honor the way your students are coming to us. A lot of them have gone through loss, a lot of them have gone through hardship, and a lot of them have been needing our connection and our support that we offer to our students throughout the school year. So I encourage you to share love. I encourage you to be honest and truthful with your students on the hard days. Even when you're having a hard day, it's okay to tell your students that you're struggling too, because it's important to make those connections. And lastly, I want to remind you to take care of yourselves. Pour back into your cups emotionally, spiritually, whatever you can do to heal and take care of yourselves so that you can show up the next day and be that amazing teacher you can be for your students.
That was history teacher Lorelei Chavez from the Santo Domingo School in New Mexico. When we come back, an athletic director at Bacone College breaks barriers in Muskogee, Oklahoma. Bacone College in Muskogee, Oklahoma has a new history-making athletic director. Tara Cooney Baker is the first woman to hold the position at the school. It's not the first time she's made history. Oglala Lakota College retired her jersey after she scored over 1,000 career points in her collegiate career. She has been a teacher and basketball coach for 10 years and is currently working on a doctoral degree.
So I came about a year ago. I was actually in Washington State. Puyallup, I was working for the Puyallup tribe, Chief Leshai schools, and I was a basketball coach, and I taught fifth grade there. So, made the journey all the way across the country, it felt like, but it's been different because usually my background is K through 12, but now I'm at the college level. So it's been a little bit of an adjustment, but I do like it. Stepping into the athletic director role has been challenging, but I see a lot of, promising students coming, a lot of good stuff coming here to Bacone.
Being a student athlete and coach helped prepare her for the job of athletic director.
I think I understand the game a lot better coming from, being an athlete and then becoming a coach and now into this role. So I understand what the students' needs and their feelings, but also from a kind of a teaching perspective and that kind of stuff, what I need to do so that they could be successful. So I kind of see it from both sides of my upbringing, and now that I'm a coach, athletic director. So
Cooney Baker is Bacon's first female athletic director.
I was kind of shocked because I know there's a lot of women that are distinguished and I think could do the role, but I think they've been overlooked a lot. So I was just kind of shocked that I was actually the first woman here to be an athletic director. But I'm glad I could, set the bar and hopefully more women to follow after me.
Perseverance is important for young women to pursue their dreams.
Just a lot of encouragement and telling them, not to give up on their dream. Especially a lot of us, we come from the reservation or from poverty, and just trying to break the cycle and continue to persevere and don't give up on their dreams.
That was Bacone College Athletic Director Tara Cooney Baker. Indigenous organizers are finding innovative ways to reach voters. ICT's Karina Dominguez has the story.
Skaters are ready to exercise their voting rights after advocates turn to skate parks. In an effort to increase voter turnout among Native youth for the midterm elections, Protect the Sacred and Indian Collective hosted Skate to the Polls on the Navajo Nation.
Civic participation can be joyful, it can be fun. It is fun. We are proving it today at Skate to the Polls. The community showed up, and I'm so proud. They came to celebrate our power.
Advocates say many hurdles stand in the way of Indigenous voters, including infrequent polling places in post offices and limited internet access. Organizers say they want to engage Indigenous, Black, Latinx, and other historically overlooked communities to increase voter turnout.
I am reclaiming my power. I am reclaiming my land. I am reclaiming my power for my community, the Native American community, and the next 7 generations.
More events will take place leading up to the midterms in November, including a Skate to the Polls for students in Georgia, a quinceañera-inspired ride to the polls in trucks and limos for first-time Latina voters in Texas, and an Election Day horseback ride to the polls in Arizona. In Tucson, Arizona, Karina Dominguez, ICT News.
A leader in Indigenous medicine is headed to Johns Hopkins University's Bloomberg School of Public Health. Dr. Don Warren will serve as the Provost Fellow for Indigenous Policy and co-director of the Center for American Indian Health. I caught up with him as he was transitioning away from the University of North Dakota. There, he was a professor and chair of Indigenous Health, an associate dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and director of the Public Health Program and co-director of InMed, Indians into Medicine.
At University of North Dakota, I've been very blessed to be able to lead the Indians into Medicine or InMed program, as well as develop several new programs. So at UND, we have InMed, which has been around for nearly 50 years, and we've now graduated over 260 American Indian Alaska Native physicians. And we have a relatively new PhD in Indigenous health, and that has 50 students in the first 3 cohorts of students. So a lot of good work at UND. And I'm very excited about the opportunities at Johns Hopkins. For me personally and professionally, it's an opportunity to build upon this work, but also to look at the doctorate in public health and how we might link Indigenous health principles to that curriculum, but also develop international Indigenous health research and educational programming.
Johns Hopkins has a solid reputation in Indigenous health.
Well, Johns Hopkins is very well known, particularly in public health. The Bloomberg School of Public Health is the #1 ranked public health school in the nation, and really it's a leader in the world. And the Center for American Indian Health has been in place for over 30 years, housed at Johns Hopkins, and they've done a lot of work with Southwestern tribes and really across the nation. They've engaged over 200 tribes in various types of programs. So they're well respected nationally and internationally, but they're also doing good work in Indian country. So I'm excited to join as co-director of the center and expanding our work both in the US and abroad.
Like Dr. Warren's work at UND, he has the opportunity to impact health policy on several levels at Johns Hopkins.
Yeah, so within the provost office at Johns Hopkins, they have what's called the Provost Fellows Program, and it's to build out a specialty area within academics. So my role will be to expand Indigenous health policy. And what's exciting is that Johns Hopkins also has a new building right on Capitol Hill. So that will be opening up in the fall of 2023. So I'll have an office both in Baltimore with the School of Public Health, but also in Washington, D.C., focused on policy issues. And there's so much work to be done with policy and legislation to improve Indigenous health. So it'll be wonderful to have a front row seat, so to speak, in working on these issues in a very meaningful way.
Dr. Warren describes critical issues for Indian country.
There are so many issues. If we look at the U.S., I think the under-resourcing of Indian health service has been a longstanding issue. The current administration has done a good job of trying to increase resources for Indian health service and related programs, but we're still terribly underfunded, particularly when you look at the needs in Indian country for health services. So that's one of the biggest issues, is just making sure we have adequate resources and that the federal government lives up to its treaty obligation to provide health services for our people. Other issues include the ability to respond to public health crises, whether it's COVID or monkeypox, or even looking at chronic disease and how we still haven't gotten adequate control over things like cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. We still see disparities there. So we have a lot of work to do on the policy front for resources, but also on the programmatic front to prevent chronic disease. I think a lot of our providers are feeling tired and exhausted from all of the work related to the COVID-19 response. But in addition to that, I think all of the misinformation that's out there, I think all of the politically motivated disinformation that's out there also puts us in a position where we feel like the profession is sometimes under attack, unfairly and unnecessarily. And it really is unsettling to see how politics have had such a huge impact on public health response and even the public's perspective of public health. Our system in the US is really among the best in the world when it comes to public health response. But I think a lot of the misinformation that's out there has kind of tainted the image of the work that we do. So there's both physical and mental exhaustion, but there's also disappointment in the politics around it.
That was Dr. Don Warren. Native nations have marked the passing of times in a variety of ways. For the Hopi people, the seasons are tied to the agricultural cycle as well as ceremonies. The Natwani Coalition is a nonprofit organization located on the Hopi Reservation in northern Arizona. Its mission is to strengthen Hopi agriculture and food systems. Kyle Natumya is the program manager for the organization. The cycle of life for the Hopi revolves around corn, a sacred plant for their people.
All of Hopi, of life and religion, its entire cycle revolves around Hopi as one of its key staples of life. It's the thing that sustained Hopi for at least 1,000 years and probably longer than that. So in so many ways, we consider ourselves corn as well. It's our mom. When you're born, that you have your mom, she literally lays with you. That corn will be given to you, and it's considered your mom as well, and then she'll be with you. And also, just as our entire life, we consider ourselves as just a mirror of corn. So when corn grows, when you plant it in the ground, it's small like us when we're kids. When we grow up, tall like them, and eventually when they get older, the corn, their leaves will reach out and touch the earth. And we think of that as like support. And so when you think of getting older, when you start to maybe lean forward a little bit, and maybe you have like a cane or something, so we consider that as just a mirror of we see ourselves as the same thing. So we're just, everything in Hopi is revolved around corn. It's everything. It's just, it's the foundation of pretty much Hopi for the most part.
That was Kyle Natumya. As the seasons change, another event that many folks look forward to in August is the Indian Market in Santa Fe. It's a production of the Southwestern Association for Indian Arts, and they celebrated its centennial anniversary this year. Jeremy Filippi brings us this report.
It feels good to see other Native people and to learn and to know that, when it feels like you're invisible, you're not.
I haven't seen these friends a long time ago, and the only time I see them is Indian market here. They look me up and they see me and give them a hug again. I don't see them until maybe 2 years later.
Compared to last year, there's a lot more people, which is always good, especially since it's 100th year. There's a grand sense of culture, and there's people all around interacting, intermingling with all this, Native American culture.
Rarely do you see space where there's a bunch of artists who get to present themselves and, in their own way.
I took a second place with a sculpture over there. I call it Talking God, and this one, Rainbow for Life. I took a first place on that one, which I'm grateful for. There's just amazing artists around. I was didn't just enter it, and luckily, the judge was on my side, I guess,
I got to run into so many family from different tribes as well as my tribe, and it's a beautiful thing. It's like seeing people I haven't seen in a long time come. It's an enjoyable thing to do, and it's beautiful. It's worth it.
I've been here ever since I was a kid. Dad's done the market for quite a long time. I'm just intending to keep doing it. Why not? It's fun.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. Standing
The ICT Newscast is produced by Indig Public Media. This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.